Oh, this is gonna be crazy. Welcome everybody, and welcome to another edition of SpraynPray1000's Verdict. I am SpraynPray1000, and today is the first episode of Season 4, and we are going to talk about a game I finished just a few days ago, Tales of Zestiria. So let's just start right off the bat. Tales of Zestiria is a JRPG, latest in a long-running line of Tales games, and like usual, a lot of things the Tales games are notable for return in this game. So, for instance, the combat in this game, I guess we'll start off with the gameplay aspect of it. The combat in this game is very similar to other Tales games. You basically control one player, and three other characters are controlled by the AI in real-time battles. Similar to other Tales games, you select a target. You have a one move or one button that does a certain type of moves, and another button that does more powerful but slower or even casting time moves. And you can use items and stuff. You can target different enemies. You can give commands to your team. The usual kind of things that Tales games are notable for. The battles are instanced, but for the first time in Tales history, the battles take place in the overworld. So it's none of the maps that you're used to in Tales games where it's like an instanced little area that pretends that it's in where you are. No, if you're walking through a door and you get ambushed, or you're in a tight hallway and you run into an enemy, you're going to fight in those areas. You'll actually see the door. You'll actually see, the hallway will still be exactly the same. It's literally no change, really, but from world map roaming to in battle gameplay. Now, the one thing I will say about this is that it's awesome. It's cool. It adds a lot. It feels like it really helps with the immersion. But, and unfortunately, it turns out to be a negative for this game, I would go as far as to say. While the combat is fast-paced and enjoyable, and there's a lot of aspects to it that make it overall very positive, one of the negatives of the combat system in this game is unfortunately the fact that the camera often gets wedged in such ways that you can't even really tell what's going on. So let's say that you're fighting enemies, and as I said, let's bring up the tight hallway example. Well, the hallway might be tight, but if you're in, the world map or whatever, just running around, it's not that bad. You can control it with the right stick. You can figure out ways around it, and get a good angle so you can see what you're doing. The problem that this game has that other Tales games don't is that when you get into combat, you lose the ability to control the camera directly. You can adjust it minorly in combat, but generally the camera immediately gets constricted if an enemy pushes you into a corner, or if you're casting and you get knocked around, while casting, or anything like that, if you position yourself certain ways. And again, since there's no real camera control, it becomes harder and harder to see. The right stick gets rebound, so you can't use it for camera control. And just in general, it leads to a lot of weird scenarios. The fact that a lot of these tight areas, these dungeons, underground areas, are like this, it really makes it rather annoying, and it makes it difficult to be able to look through everything and see what's going on. So unfortunately, the camera in combat and the usage of the world map in combat kind of end up being negatives, although how negative they are fluctuates based on where you are and, what enemies you're fighting. But overall, it does get very annoying when you can't see what's going on. Now, what I did like about the combat in this game is that I did like the fact that so in this game, you can actually combine characters together. So, for example, you have two human characters in the game that are basically mainstays, and then you have these other characters which are called Seraphim. And as you progress through the game, you unlock the ability to armatize with these Seraphim, which then allows you to fight alongside them. You gain better abilities, you gain combined stats, you gain better arts, you gain access to a ton of new stuff, which really helps mix up and diversify the gameplay, which really I liked about this game a lot. However, unfortunately, what happens is that you need to have a 1-to-1 ratio of humans to Seraphim in order to armatize. And so a lot of times, like what they do in Tales games, they like to have their whole one-on-one fights, and there's things where one character's solo. Thankfully, in this game, you have one human and one seraphim, but without a second human, you can't bring out another seraphim, which makes it a little annoying. You know, it kind of adds difficulty to some fights where otherwise you would be perfectly fine. And ultimately, it's a cool system. It was annoying at some parts, I feel, but ultimately it kind of redeems itself. But it's not exactly something I'd want to see as a mainstay in this capacity, just because of the simple fact that a lot of characters are basically worthless when you don't have a second human to help you. And now it is rare when it does happen, but when it does happen, you really notice it. You really feel that blow. Um, but I like the amortization system. It really helps mix up stuff about the game, and it fits in with the game's combat. Additionally, I do like the ways that they've worked around certain things, like the mystic arts, and which are the ultimate techniques and other things of that nature. But the gameplay itself is pretty okay. The world map and the areas to explore are gigantic. They're big. They actually feel, I guess you could say, realistically scaled for the most part, and it's really well done in that aspect, which I really like a lot about it. Unfortunately, the thing is that the world maps are so big, and it really just takes forever for you to traverse a lot of these areas. Now, you get an ability that helps you with that later on called wind stepping, but the world maps are so gigantic, and it just feels like there's not that much in it. You know, there's not that much to really do. Now, there are certain things that you can do in it, and there's tons of optional areas and stuff that you can go visit. But really, like, you spend most of your time running around empty space very slowly that really doesn't add to much. Like, it gives, again, a great sense of immersion. But on the flip of that, it really just does not add too much, I feel. And that's unfortunately one of those things that I don't like about these new world maps in a lot of games. Um, and it's all right. It's passable, you know, it's okay, but it's nothing too significant. It's not like a game like, I don't know, like Fallout or something like that, where there's tons of stuff that you can always do in it, and, you know, you can run around, you can free roam in almost every area. I mean, yeah, Fallout is a gigantic world, but there's always tons of stuff. There's always tons of enemies, always random settlements you can just run into and loot and stuff like that. Also, you get the ability to warp, but this game annoyingly restricts you a lot of the time when you're doing story stuff. It just kind of makes it more difficult just to get around, um, which is unfortunate because I feel that that's one of the more annoying things that they have in this game. Now, on the flip of that, I do like the Lord of the Land system that they've implemented, which is basically a way for you to get better items, better gear. Helps you level up characters and helps you get better gear with certain stats and attributes on it. And the more you fight, the more bonus points you can put towards stats like detecting enemies and detecting treasure and stuff like that, which is really cool, and I like that system, so that is definitely a plus. But the other thing that I will say about the gameplay is that it has nice, seamless integration between the storyline and the cutscenes, which is pretty cool. So I'll give them that because that was very well done. It surprised me when it first happened, and I like that a lot about this game. So the gameplay of this game is pretty good. It has its flaws, you know, again, the camera being one of them, just being really silly at certain times. But overall, it's very fascinating. The other thing that I really don't like is I don't like that the bosses in this game, and just about any tough enemy in this game, they always seem to get second wins when they're really low on health, just so that they can take out a character or two, or potentially your whole party with like one or two moves. Really not a fan of that. I think that that's kind of cheap. I think it's kind of, you know, unnecessary, and they've certainly never done that in any Tales game before. Now, it is worth knowing that they do kind of do things a little bit differently in this game with regards to stats and health. But it is kind of annoying when you're fighting a boss and you have him on the ropes, and, you know, he's super low on health, and then just he turns around and like slaps dead 3 people. Really kind of annoying, really kind of silly, I feel, especially on just normal difficulty, and certainly not exactly what I prefer from a Tales game. And even when I was playing Zestiria on hard, that kind of stuff didn't happen. So it is kind of silly and annoying in my opinion. But beyond that, the gameplay is really well done. I certainly like the combat that they've done with the game. And, you know, it feels pretty nice that they've tried to, they've mixed things around rather than just being a dump of abilities. You know, you just dump your most powerful moves. They actually tried to integrate certain things into it, which is pretty nice. And The next thing that I will say is, speaking of the cutscenes and seamless integration, is the story of this game is okay, but safe. And I'm not going to say it's bad. I'm going to say that it's safe. And here's my reason for doing so, right? This story really does not do anything too dramatic. There's a few things here or there, like one about halfway through the game and another towards the end of the game, where they kind of, make things a little bit more epic and a little more dramatic. But ultimately, this game does not really push any envelopes. It doesn't really do much. It just kind of, with the story, it's safe, it's predictable, and it's just kind of simple. Like, no complicated things really occur in the story, which is good because it means that what is there is staple, it's solid, it's easy to digest. But it's also kind of a letdown and pretty poor because, again, Tales games, at least everyone I've played, has always had a very dramatic storyline, tons of things happening, things you would never have expected. And so this game, like, Vesperia, Symphonia, Exilia 1 and 2, have always had dramatic, epic storylines. And I've always liked that about Tales, is that they've had these different things. This game's story kind of feels more like Grace's a bit. And that's a weird trend I noticed with this game, between Grace's and this game and the rest of the franchise. Is this game is very similar to Grace's in a lot of ways. It takes a lot of cues from Grace's. Very simplistic story, very simple combat, simple but intense, and just very awkward character moments, very awkward things. And then they do the same thing they did in Grace's, where they give you a character, and then that character is basically non-existent in the story. They almost never come with you. They're there for a little bit, and then they just disappear right off the map. And you might as well forget that they were even in the game. And it really is weird because they sell stuff that character can use, but you can't have that character back. Feels very awkward. It feels very weird when you have a game where there's a character that's fully developed, has everything about it. They have a mystic art, they have all these different arts, they have tons of cool stuff, and then they're just like not used at all in the campaign of the game. Beyond, the first maybe, or I don't know, like 5-6 hours or so. And it's just kind of like, why would you develop them then? Why would you put them in? Why would you take that effort and not at least be able to get them at the end of the game so you could do cool stuff? Same thing that they did in Grace's, they do in this game, which is very weird. Additionally, the story is good. Like, there's a lot of jokes that they like to make very often, which is cool, I guess, but at sometimes it just feels like, I don't know, it's really weird. Like, this game wants to have a very serious story, I feel, but it does it in the most weird way possible by making the story very predictable and downright silly a lot of times with a lot of the other stuff. And don't get me wrong, there's tons of serious character building and a lot of cool skits, like usual, they return in Tales games. But I just am left feeling like I wish there was way more. Like, I wish the story that I had was the foundation upon which, like, the statue of David stood on, and there could be something really epic that you don't realize until very late in the story. And there's a few twists here or there, like I said, but it doesn't really, I don't want to say save, because, the story doesn't need to be saved. It just needs to be improved. So it doesn't really contribute greatly to diversifying that. And that's unfortunate. I feel that they could have done a lot more with the story in that regard. Fleshed out characters a bit more, had a lot more cool stuff happen. And I think there's the pacing of it could have been much better as well. And I get that it's supposed to be kind of like a new era of Tales games. But ultimately, I really hope that this is a step that they step much farther into the future. They take it and they go way further with this for the next Tales game. Because, there's a lot to be desired from it. Anyway, the next thing I want to talk about is the presentation, which is basically the graphics and the sound. So, what console is this game on? Like, again, this is the most boring segment of the verdict, in my opinion. Of course, this game looks great. It's on the PS4 and also on the PC, by the way, which is really nice of them for those of you who always want to play Tales games. This game looks really good. I like usual, again, it's like with everything. It's a later installment. They focused on the graphics. The game looks really good. Again, it has that nice Tales art style that's, like a 3D anime. It feels like you're watching an anime come to life. Ufotable animated the cutscenes in this game, which there are a surprising lack of. They're really not that spread out throughout the game. But at the very least, they look really nice where they happen, and I really appreciate that. I really think that that's cool. Um, and I really enjoyed this game thoroughly. Now, the sound is great. I think that a lot of the music is catchy. I think a lot of it's really good. Um, which is again why the presentation aspect of a game is really the most boring to talk about. But nonetheless, this Tales of Zestiria is a good game to jump into if you're new to Tales. It's if you're a fan of Tales, I mean, you're probably going to get it, but it is a good game to jump into if you're a fan. You know, you want to see what the newest thing is. It's definitely not worth passing up. So ultimately, this game is worth getting, I feel, if you're an avid RPG player, if you're an avid JRPG player especially, if you're an avid Tales fan especially. But if you're looking for just, you know, if you're just Joe Blow and you want to play a RPG, you might want to give this a look. Obviously, if you're not put off by anime or anything like that, you'll definitely want to look into it. There's definitely a lot of stuff to be had here. It'll definitely keep you busy for a long time. I'm gonna keep playing this game and keep grinding out stuff and do New Game Plus and all that cool stuff. But it's worth looking into if you've never played a Tales game before. There's a lot of cool stuff to it, but don't go into this expecting, you know, to have your world shattered. Because this game does well at what its strengths are, but it doesn't do it the best out of everything in the franchise, nor does it do it, nor does it keep it up the longest, I feel. Let's just put it like that, you know, while we're making weird analogies about it. So ultimately, what would I give Tales of Zestiria for the PS4? What I would give this game is a 82 out of 100. It does a lot of cool stuff. It does a lot of good stuff. But the problem with it is that it doesn't, what it does well, it could do better. And what it doesn't do well, needless to say, it could do well. So I would say that this game gets an 82 based on the fact that it's pretty good. It's satisfying. It definitely keeps you wondering what's going to happen next. It definitely keeps you engaged from start to finish. But could be much better in some regards, I feel. And definitely I'm looking forward to see what they improve on later because, I mean, let's be honest, there's a lot more that could be done with this formula. So an 82 out of 100 is what I would give Zestiria. Good game. Definitely hope that Namco Bandai improve on what they've made so far, and they continue to do so and for much later on. And yeah, so that's going to be it for this episode of The Verdict. I am SpraynPray1000. Thank you all, and I will see you next time